Welcome to our channel. Today, we bring you news that weighs heavy on the heart. Some truly remarkable people have recently left this world. In this video, we will share their stories, their legacy, their final chapters. As a sign of remembrance and in support of their memory, please subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your simple action can help others hear their stories and keep their memory alive. We won't delay any longer. Let's begin this tribute to those we've lost. In April in New Orleans, Louisiana, the world bid farewell to Calvin Theodore Briggs, a transformative American jazz trumpeter, composer, and educator whose work bridged eras, genres, and generations. His music didn't just echo through clubs and concert halls. It carried history, pain, joy, and the unrelenting pulse of change. Calvin was born in Charleston, South Carolina, in the summer of 1952. His father, Ernest Briggs, was a dock worker and amateur saxophonist. His mother, Gloria, taught literature at a local high school. Their home rang with music and verse. Billie Holiday at breakfast, Baldwin before bed. Calvin picked up his first trumpet at age 8, a second-hand relic his uncle had rescued from a pawn shop. He played until his lips bled, teaching himself scales by mimicking records in the basement. At age 13, he was struck by the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Not only the tragedy itself, but the haunting silence that followed. Calvin filled that silence with sound, composing a requiem in his notebook titled Memphis April. His early compositions showed a rare sophistication, blending traditional jazz forms with gospel chords and unconventional time signatures. He attended Berklee College of Music on a scholarship, where he studied under Donald Byrd and Maria Schneider. While his technical prowess quickly impressed faculty, it was his insistence on incorporating Southern spirituals and protest chants into formal jazz structures that set him apart. Some professors discouraged it. Calvin refused. "If I leave my roots behind, I'm not improvising. I'm imitating." In 1977, he released his debut album Waters Run Backward, which became a landmark in modern jazz fusion. It combined brass quintets with spoken-word poetry and Afro-Caribbean rhythms. The album earned him a Grammy nomination and a spot at the Montreux Jazz Festival. Over the next 4 decades, Calvin recorded 18 studio albums, including Low Country Fire (1985), Trumpet Psalms (1997), and Black Static (2009). He collaborated with legends like Herbie Hancock, Cassandra Wilson, and Kamasi Washington, but always returned to New Orleans, the city he called his heartbeat. In 2011, Calvin received the National Endowment for the Arts Jazz Masters Fellowship for redefining the trumpet as both a political and spiritual instrument. That same year, he opened the Briggs School of Improvisational Arts, which provided tuition-free jazz education to underserved youth in Louisiana. Despite his acclaim, Calvin's journey was never linear. In the early 90s, he suffered a breakdown following the sudden death of his wife Lila, a jazz vocalist he had met on tour and called the soul of every song I wrote. For 3 years, he stopped performing. He taught, volunteered at food kitchens, and wrote a personal manifesto he never published, titled Sound is Survival. He eventually returned to the stage, more subdued but deeper in tone. His 1997 comeback album Trumpet Psalms was described by critics as haunting, holy, and hard-won. Audiences felt the grief and the grace. At home, Calvin was gentle and meticulous. He cooked red beans and rice every Sunday, tended to his lemon tree, and wrote music in the early mornings with incense burning and Coltrane humming low in the background. He remarried in 2004 to dancer and choreographer Tasha Green, with whom he had twin daughters, Mariah and Simone. His daughters would often sit at his feet during rehearsals, mimicking trumpet fingerings with toy flutes. He mentored dozens of young musicians, not just technically but spiritually. He insisted they read poetry, visit graveyards, and walk barefoot in the grass before they touched their instruments. "Music is not what you play," he told them. "It's what you remember." He supported Hurricane Katrina victims with benefit concerts, built music rooms in local public schools, and helped launch a prison songwriting program called Voices from the Yard. He believed in the redemptive power of creation, even behind walls. Among his most quoted reflections, "Improvisation is memory turned inside out. Play like your grandmother is listening. The horn doesn't lie, only you can do that." In his final years, Calvin was diagnosed with lung fibrosis, which gradually stole his breath but not his fire. He performed sitting down, then later just directed with his hands, his eyes, his soul. His last public appearance was a tribute concert in New Orleans, where his former students, now masters themselves, played his earliest work under his gaze. In his last interview, filmed in a quiet garden in Treme, he said, "When I'm gone, don't search for me in the silence. Find me in the space between the notes." He passed away peacefully in his sleep, just blocks from the very street where he once learned to play on his uncle's stoop. Outside, a brass band marched in spontaneous tribute, playing Amazing Grace with soft defiance. Calvin Theodore Briggs left behind not just memories, but an entire era embodied in his writings, ideas, and students. In April, in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the world lost Helen Margot Wallace, a visionary American painter, cultural anthropologist, and preservationist whose canvases captured not only the colors of the land, but the memory of entire civilizations. For more than 5 decades, Helen's work pushed past the boundaries of traditional visual art, becoming a tool of education, resistance, and historical revival. Helen was born in Phoenix, Arizona, in the spring of 1950. Her father, William Wallace, was a high school history teacher with a deep love for Native American mythology. Her mother, June Wallace, was a textile artist of Mexican descent who taught embroidery to local girls in their adobe-lined neighborhood. Their home was filled with desert wind, thick books, and hand-woven blankets. By age 6, Helen was painting on cardboard scraps behind her mother's studio using leftover dyes. At age 13, she was deeply impacted by the demolition of an ancient Hopi dwelling near their town to make way for a new freeway. That destruction changed her. From then on, she painted not just what she saw, but what was at risk of being lost. "Art," she later wrote, "is a memory that refuses to die quietly." Helen studied both fine arts and anthropology at the University of New Mexico. Her mentors, including the renowned Pueblo historian Maria Tallchief and muralist Diego Flores, helped her blend ethnographic discipline with visual poetry. Her early thesis project, Bones and Sky, featured large-scale canvases embedded with fragments of stone, textile, and handwritten indigenous stories. Critics dismissed it as too conceptual. Her professors called it prophetic. In 1978, Helen held her first solo exhibition, Earth Witness, at a small gallery in Taos. The show, a visceral blend of oil painting and environmental installation, drew widespread acclaim. Art historian Lena Stillwell described it as a museum, a protest, and a prayer all in one room. Over the years, Helen's visual style evolved, incorporating aerial photography, biodegradable pigments, and sacred geometry. She painted with soil collected from endangered lands and used crushed turquoise to depict water. Her 1993 traveling collection Disappearing Songs depicted 30 indigenous languages through layered portraits and vanished maps. It toured 37 cities and sparked curriculum changes in several university art programs. In 2003, she received the National Humanities Medal for weaving the histories of America's first peoples into the fibers of its future. That same year, her public mural Beneath the River, They Speak was unveiled in Albuquerque, a 100-foot panorama commissioned by the National Endowment for the Arts and created alongside youth from 6 tribal nations. But Helen's path was not smooth. In the late 80s, she publicly clashed with several art institutions over their refusal to display indigenous works not deemed contemporary enough. Her refusal to conform to the Western Gallery standard led to blacklisting from 3 major museums. She responded not with silence, but with the wall they wouldn't hang, a 10-piece protest series displayed across the chain-link fences of construction zones in Santa Fe. She once said, "If they won't let the story in, I'll paint it where they can't look away." Helen never married, but she fostered 2 daughters, Naomi and Lark, both of whom became educators. At home, Helen was quiet, mystical, and deeply ritualistic. She began every morning with tea and a candle lit to her ancestors. Her studio was a sanctuary of dried herbs, prayer beads, and music that ranged from Navajo chants to Yo-Yo Ma's cello suites. She kept journals full of dreams, sketched constantly, and left notes on her refrigerator that read, "Remember to breathe the color," and "The sky is not blue, it's longing." She taught for 20 years at the Institute of American Indian Arts, mentoring young artists, encouraging cultural revival through technique, and insisting that art must feed the people. Her students remember her as equal parts oracle and rebel, stern, loving, uncompromising. Her most quoted sayings include, "Paint with dirt. That's where the truth lives. Culture is not a museum. It's a heartbeat. You can't preserve what you refuse to feel." In her final years, Helen was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. Knowing what was ahead, she began creating a final series titled Forget Me Not, in which she painted layered portraits of her ancestors from memory, then intentionally erased parts of them, a haunting meditation on memory and identity. The collection was completed with help from her daughters and students, and now resides in the Smithsonian. Her last interview was brief but lucid. Sitting on a bench overlooking the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, she smiled and said, "My hands remember what my mind forgets. And that's enough." She passed away peacefully, wrapped in one of her mother's blankets, in the same region where she had first painted the land as a child. Helen Margot Wallace left behind not just memories, but an entire era embodied in her writings, ideas, and students. Stephen John Carell was born on August 16, 1962, in the small, unassuming town of Concord, Massachusetts, a place soaked in New England's golden light and revolutionary ghosts, where stone walls lean with history and autumns arrive in burnt orange and cinnamon. Concord is a town of thinkers, poets, and scholars. Thoreau, Emerson, Hawthorne. Their spirits still seem to walk its winding roads and wooded trails. There is a gentle reserve in the air, a quiet pride in things well-made and well-meant. It was, in many ways, a fitting cradle for a man whose greatness would be measured not in volume, but in depth. His mother, Harriet Teresa Koch, worked as a psychiatric nurse, steady, empathetic, emotionally astute. She was the kind of woman who listened with her eyes, and who brought a calm, maternal intelligence to every conversation. His father, Edwin A. Carell, was an electrical engineer of Italian descent, measured, patient, with hands that were always fixing something, always busy. Their marriage was one of loyalty and quiet affection. They did not speak in grand gestures. They showed love by showing up. Steve was the youngest of 4 boys, and in a household full of older brothers, he learned early how to carve out identity in the margins. The Carell home, just outside town, was a place of modest routines. Church on Sundays, dinner at the table, summer nights lit by fireflies, and Red Sox games crackling from a dusty radio. There was laughter, often dry and self-deprecating, and discipline, though never harsh. Steve's humor bloomed slowly. It wasn't about being the center of attention. It was about timing, about knowing just when to tilt a sentence or raise an eyebrow. He made people laugh without trying to, which is why it worked. As a child, Steve was curious, introverted, and deeply sensitive, though he hid the last part well. He loved history, was fascinated by war reenactments, and often dressed up in old army uniforms for neighborhood games. His toys were simple: plastic soldiers, baseball gloves, cassette tapes filled with strange character voices he'd recorded in secret. He was not a troublemaker. He was the observer, the listener, the one who saw what others missed. School at the Fenn School, and later Middlesex School, was both a comfort and a crucible. Steve excelled quietly, a solid student, well-liked but never flashy. He played ice hockey with intensity and studied Latin with quiet dedication. He didn't know yet that he wanted to perform. Acting wasn't a childhood obsession. It was more like a doorway that opened without warning. In 8th grade, he was cast in a school play. He put on a costume. The audience laughed. Something shifted. It was the first time I felt entirely comfortable, he later recalled. Like I had permission to be everything I was too nervous to be in real life. He went on to Denison University in Granville, Ohio, a small liberal arts college nestled among hills and trees. The kind of place where conversations stretched across campus lawns, and nothing ever seemed truly rushed. At Denison, he majored in history, toyed with the idea of law school, and played goalkeeper for the school's hockey team. But again the stage tugged. He joined a student-run improvisation troupe, and under the lights something familiar returned. The sense of flight, of presence, of becoming. After college, Steve moved to Chicago, not with swagger, but with suitcase and savings, prepared to fail quietly if need be. There he trained at the Second City, a legendary breeding ground for comedians. It was baptism by fire. Rehearsals ran late. Shows could flop. Audiences were brutal. But Steve learned to be generous on stage. He didn't steal scenes. He supported them. He understood the power of restraint, how a moment of silence could outpunch the loudest joke. One night Tina Fey, watching him from the wings, whispered to a friend, "He's going to break all of our hearts one day." Early career roles were scattered: commercials, voiceovers, small parts on television. He did a stint as a correspondent on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, where his deadpan delivery became a quiet sensation. And then in 2005 everything changed. The Office, an American adaptation of the British cult series, cast Steve as Michael Scott, the bumbling, deluded, desperately human regional manager of a failing paper company. At first, the audience resisted him. He wasn't Ricky Gervais. He wasn't cool. But week after week, Steve turned Michael Scott into something more than a punchline. He turned him into a man who longed to be loved, who tried too hard, who failed beautifully and kept trying anyway. It was comedy with marrow. The world fell in love. Steve Carell became a household name, not in the explosive way some stars do, but like someone who had always been in the room, and you'd only just noticed. He followed up with The 40-Year-Old Virgin, where his sincerity made raunch feel redemptive, and Little Miss Sunshine, where he played a suicidal academic with breathtaking delicacy. There were awards, applause, a Golden Globe, an Oscar nomination, and still, he kept his distance from the Hollywood machine. Fame never sat comfortably on his shoulders. He didn't move to Los Angeles. He bought a general store in Massachusetts and lived a quiet life with his wife Nancy Walls, herself a brilliant comedic mind and former SNL cast member, and their children Elizabeth and John. He mowed his own lawn. He made school lunches. He painted watercolors in the attic. There were darker seasons too. Scripts that didn't land. Creative droughts. A time when grief struck, the loss of his parents, one after the other. He retreated into silence then, spending long days at home, speaking little, painting more. Grief isn't loud, he told a friend. It's the echo after the laugh that doesn't come. He returned in roles that surprised: Foxcatcher, The Big Short, Beautiful Boy. Each one peeled back a layer of who he was. He played broken men, dishonest men, fragile fathers. And every time, the audience believed him, because he didn't ask for sympathy. He just told the truth. In his later years, Steve gave more interviews. Not many, but enough to show the world what it perhaps always suspected, that he was above all a man of grace, of humility. He spoke often of his wife, of the value of kindness, of how comedy had never been a shield but a bridge. "If people laugh," he said once, "they're not alone. That's the only reason I ever did any of this." He spent his final years mentoring young writers and actors, returning to theater, and teaching improv to children. He didn't crave legacy. He craved honesty. He wrote essays about parenting, about silence, about the strangeness of being known by strangers. His last performance was in a play called Still, where he spoke only 13 words over 90 minutes. But when he wept, the audience followed. Steve Carell passed quietly at home, surrounded by his family, his dog asleep at his feet. He had asked for no funeral, no spectacle, just a bench placed under an old elm tree near his childhood home in Concord, with a plaque that read, "He listened." The world mourned not a celebrity, but a companion, someone who had made them laugh in the worst times, who had reminded them that awkwardness was human, and that decency still mattered. Tributes poured in, not from tabloids but from neighbors, from fans who'd found solace in his gentleness. Today, Steve Carell's name lives not in bright lights, but in the soft glow of memory. In classrooms where quiet kids finally speak. In homes where families laugh together over reruns. In moments where someone feels less alone, because someone once said something silly with sincerity. He left behind not noise but warmth. And in the end, that was everything.